Opening, the gate breaks. Steel hits flesh before dawn. A flag rises where no flag should be, above a narrow postern in the Blachernay quarter. The Kirkoporta is open. The roar climbs the stone like a storm breaking. Ladders hook, drums punch the ribs. At the St. Romanus Gate, Constantine XI shouts a prayer, then disappears into a crush of shields and iron. Men skid in blood-slicked dust. A cannon mouth steams. Somewhere behind them, a library door splinters. We're inside the last Roman city at the moment it comes apart. To understand why the wall cracked here, we need to go back. Prologue. A dying capital's last wager. The city had starved before, but not like this. Bread came thin, stretched with barley and hope. Those walls, the Theodosian triple skin of moat, outer and inner, once terrified kings. Now, 7,000 defenders looked out at an army 10 times larger, sown in crescents of tents and gun batteries. 1,000 years of empire stood on miles of stone and the nerve of tired men. Constantine XI didn't leave. He rode the line, not as a distant emperor, but as a captain in beaten armor. He told his people he'd live or die with the city. Latin volunteers, Genoese, Venetians, Catalans, answered the old debt, but there weren't enough. You could feel division running under the stones. In churches and courtyards, union with Rome was whispered as a last lifeline. Some wept at the idea. Others said better the turban than the tiara. While the city rationed faith and flour, its last emperor gambled everything on endurance. Across the straits, a young sultan stared at the same walls and saw a throne older than his dynasty. Mehmet II wanted the red apple, the imperial idea, not just the city. He'd been schooled in history, artillery, and ambition. If he took this place, he'd be Caesar in all but name. He promised his army 3 days of sack if the city fell. That decision would matter. It fed hunger. It fed fear inside the city, too. Mothers counted children. Monks packed reliquaries. Soldiers sharpened halberds on steps that once carried emperors to coronations. Meanwhile, in scattered workshops, metalworkers fed a monster. A Hungarian founder named Urban had come first to Constantinople, offering his science. Enormous bombards that could batter ancient stone. The Byzantines couldn't pay. Mehmet could. Bronze was gathered, melted, poured. Oxen teams were set aside. Roads were greased. The basilica cannon, so large it took dozens of oxen and hundreds of men to move, promised to turn the siege from ritual to industry. Villages shook during tests. Soldiers cheered. Engineers flinched at recoil and misfires. The ground learned a new sound, the slow breath of gunpowder siege. The city answered with memory. They closed the Golden Horn with iron, a chain as thick as a man's thigh, stretched between towers, a medieval superweapon that had stopped fleets before. Galleys that nosed in met links and shame. The harbor for a moment felt safe, a pool of refuge where friendly hulls might bring grain, powder, and men. But while that was happening on the water, the land beat like a drum, batteries hammered by day. By night, the defenders climbed through lime dust and lantern smoke to rebuild what the day had erased. Rubble became parapet. Timber braces creaked into place. Mortar burned the skin. Fatigue set in like rot. Silent, cumulative, deadly. This was the new arithmetic. Time and powder versus masonry and prayer. Constantine walked it. He touched wounded stone like it was a patient. He knelt with Greeks and Latins in the same churches, straining old hatreds thin enough to see light through. He refused evacuation. He refused surrender terms. He told his court, and anyone with ears, that death with honor beat life without a city. That kind of promise binds men together and breaks them too. It leaves no way out. In Mehmet's tent, maps spread like skin. Spies traced weak points with quiet fingers. Sappers were pushed forward to eat at the earth beneath the walls. Bridges were thrown over moats. Sermons framed the siege as destiny. Imams promised triumph. The army's morale pulsed with plunder, faith, and the gaze of a 19-year-old ruler who couldn't afford failure. He moved batteries, adjusted angles, forced engineers to think bigger, faster, closer. Then the sea shifted. If the chain closed the horn, the hills above offered a terrible answer. Greased logs, hauling teams, a road built overnight under torches and whips. By morning, sails stood inside the harbor where none should be. The city woke to the impossible. Cheers on one side, a long silence on the other. Messages sprinted along parapets. Fire ships failed. Sorties bled out against disciplined screens. The defenders had to split precious men between pounding land walls and a violated harbor. Rumors spread faster than orders. Some said a halo wrapped the moon. Others swore the great church's dome glowed, an omen that drifted up and died in smoke. Priests preached endurance. Skeptics laughed bitterly and went back to the line. Men chose what to believe because belief was rations now. In the trenches, picks struck, lamps sputtered, tunnels collapsed with screams that didn't rise to the surface. Meanwhile, one detail kept getting lost in the dust and the noise. A gate small enough to forget. The Kirk Porta, tucked near the Blachernay Junction, a maintenance door in a maze of stone. Repairs piled on repairs, routines frayed, keys moved. In chaos, habits fail. What nobody knew was how crucial a small door would become when a tired hand forgot to lock it. We already know where that thread ends. But at this point, all anyone felt was weight. Food thin, powder thinning, bones thinner. The emperor still rode, the sultan still pressed. The walls still held, cracked, patched, bleeding, and the city wagered one more day against the sum of gunpowder and will. Urban's monster, the birth of the bombard. Here's the wager, stone against thunder. If the walls fall, the Roman line ends. Everyone feels it, mason, monk, janissary, emperor. Siegecraft had been a ritual for centuries. Ramps, towers, rams. Now it turns industrial. Time becomes powder. Courage becomes logistics. Walls become targets, not talismans. Urban steps into this moment like a blacksmith out of a fable. Hungarian by birth, a founder by trade, he carries a blueprint for catastrophe. He tries Constantinople first, offers his craft, asks for gold, copper, tin, grain, and trust. They don't have it. Not enough metal, not enough money, not enough time. Across the straits, Mehmet does. Bronze is a hungry metal. They strip bells, melt statues, raid treasuries. Copper pours with a living glow. Tin bites and hardens it. Clay molds the size of rooms are built, dried, braced. The furnace roars with pine and charcoal until it breathes like a beast. Men in leather aprons move in choreographies of heat, lifts, tilts, shouts that burn in the throat. A river of bronze pours into the mold throat, spitting sparks, hissing where stray moisture hides. The ground hums. The foundry floor turns into a chapel without prayers. Just dread. They wait for cooling like they wait for judgment. Days stretch. Urban walks the lines of the mold, tapping, listening. Then they crack the earth open. The barrel emerges, a colossal tube, rough skin, ringed with reinforcing hoops. Craftsmen dress it with files and oil, cut its mouth to accept a stone ball large as a man's chest. They call the masterpiece Basilica. The name fits the ambition. Now, the simple math turns brutal. The cannon weighs tons. To move it, they build a bed of timber on a frame, slung with chains, undercarriage greased. Oxen, dozens deep, lower their heads. Whips slice air, wheels groan. The road itself has to be made. Ramps banked, streams bridged, stones levered aside. Where the ground buckles, men pry and pack, then lay planks. It isn't a march. It's a forced migration with a gun in the lead. Villages learn the sound first. A dull concussion that doesn't crack like thunder, it thumps. Bowls rattle on shelves. Flocks bolt. Soldiers cheer because they're hearing the future. Engineers don't cheer. They count. Powder by the barrel, stone shot by the 100, oil for axles, rope that won't snap, water for the barrel between shots so the metal doesn't warp. Every firing is a ceremony with a casualty list. Sometimes the target, sometimes the crew. Testing teaches pain. They light the vent with a slow match. Breath holds. The wick kisses powder, a heartbeat of silence, then a roar that slaps lungs. Smoke blooms, thick and sweet and nauseating. The recoil punches timbers backward. Pins groan, wedges jump. Once a misfire coughs the load back like a belch from hell, splinters a carriage beam, snaps a man's leg sideways. Urban watches, jaw tight, and orders thicker trunnions, deeper chocks, more water, longer waits. Discipline becomes survival. Mehmet loves this. He visits the batteries like a general and a foreman. He demands faster rates of fire, tighter groupings, better angles. Batteries reposition. Parapets of earth rise around each monster. The gunners learn to walk powder to the mouth without spilling it in a haze of sparks. They learn to swab hot bores and keep their eyebrows. They learn patience. 2-3 shots a day for Basilica, because too much heat turns triumph into shrapnel. The first balls arc like slow moons. You can watch them leave the mouth, black, smooth, heavy, and drift, then drop. Stone meets stone. The wall doesn't shatter. It shudders. It remembers. Mortar cracks along old seams. Dust jets out like breath from a lung. The next shot lands a handspan to the left. The third kisses the same seam. Now it's geometry and stubbornness. The cannons don't need one killing blow. They need rhythm. Inside, masons listen for the beat. Boom, count. Boom, count. By day the wall sheds, by night the city knits. Rubble is dragged into gaps. Fresh mortar burns fingers. Timber braces wedge under arches. The air tastes like lime and powder. Sweat cuts it to salt. The wall learns a new language. Impact, settle, remake. Meanwhile, the monster has a weakness. Metal fatigues, carriages split, powder casks go light, a drizzle will soak fuses. One morning, Basilica fractures at the muzzle during a hot shot, spitting shards that carve a gunner's cheek into ribbons. Work stops. For an hour, the siege seems to exhale. Then Urban sleeves the mouth with a shorter ring, chains the barrel tighter, borrows iron from spare wheels. The gun roars again before dusk. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to keep the cadence. This is the hinge. Artillery turns siege from a test of ladders to a test of supply. You can feel the shift in conversations. Men talk powder, not saints. Carters become as critical as captains. A barrel stuck in mud can cost a day, which costs a breach. Mehmet pushes sappers forward under the gun's umbrella, lets the shells draw eyes while picks gnaw at foundations. The wall fights physics and fatigue at once. By the time the harbor is violated and the chain tricked, the landward stone is already tired. Joints widened, core fills shaken loose. When the great gun fails for good, and it will at a moment will reach, the damage is already banked. That's the truth nobody on the parapet wants to admit. Walls are habits. Bombards break habits. And once a habit cracks, it doesn't knit back to what it was. The chain and the horn, closing the sea, opening a flank. The golden horn is a bowl with one handle. Close the handle, and the bowl becomes a trap. The Byzantines knew this, so they drew iron across the mouth of the harbor. Link by link, a chain thick as a man's thigh stretched from the towers of Galata to the walls at the city's edge. Rings creaked, water slapped, and for a week the sea itself seemed loyal. Galleys nosed in and bumped humiliation. Oars bit, hulls turned, curses scattered across the water. From the parapets, sailors smirked. Inside the horn, a handful of Byzantine and Genoese ships rode at anchor, safe under friendly towers and crossbow nests. Grain might still arrive. powder might still slip through. The chain didn't just bar wood, it protected hope. Mehmet sees a closed door and looks for stairs. He climbs the hills above the Horn with engineers, scribes, and impatience. They're looking not at the water, but at the slope. The fix is medieval audacity. Take ships where ships don't go. Logs are greased. Teams of men, oxen, and curses gather by torchlight. A road of timber and tallow runs from the Bosporus crest down into the inner harbor, an overland slipway built in a night. Get this, we can still trace the path in sources and in the city's bones. They hauled light galleys, not great carracks, but enough to change the math. Crews wrapped hulls in rawhide to keep planks from scraping open. Ropes stretched like veins, drums marked cadence. Under stars and whipping lamps, the first keel slid. Wood on fat, fat on wood. A hiss, a groan, then motion. Men shoulder and chant, oxen grunt. A captain walks beside his ship on land, hand on the rail, like a funeral. The slope takes the weight and gives it back in surges. Logs roll forward as rollers, then are snatched and thrown to the head again, over and over. A human conveyor. Sparks spit from nails. A prayer breaks when a hull jounces. A carpenter slams a wedge and screams at anyone breathing too close with a lantern. By dawn, Constantinople wakes to sails inside its safe water. Bells clang. Messengers sprint the wall walks. On every bastion facing the Horn, helmets bob and stop. It looks like a conjuring trick. Galleys sit where no galley should, flags bright in quiet water, oars tucked, guns peering like new eyes. From Galata's Genoese quarter, there's a silence that says calculation. From the city's side, there's a winded gasp that says the circle just closed. Stakes flip. The chain still holds the mouth, but it's guarding an enemy already within. The inner fleet threatens the boom towers, the harbor quays, the lighter wall sections that were never meant to stand against siege guns from two sides. Archers hurry to new perches. Bombards on the landward wall still pound, so defenders split scarce men and scarcer attention. Every runner now bleeds minutes the land wall needs to live. They try fire. Fire ships, rafts packed with resin, pitch, and prayer, are lit and shoved toward the new fleet. Oars flash. The Ottomans cut anchors, backwater, and slide away, then tow the burning rafts to safe shallows, flames wobbling in their wakes. A few hulls blister. One galley's stern blackens and hisses, but she lives. The attempt costs the city men they can't spare, and courage they can't replace. They try sword. Sorties push out from the harbor walls in longboats, grapnels ready, crossbows lifted. Ottoman arrows turn the air to needles. A longboat pins, then tips under bodies. The survivors drag themselves onto a quay, already bracketed by small cannon from across the water. The chain does nothing now but hum in outgoing tide, a symbol without teeth. Unknown to many on the land walls, Mehmet uses the inner fleet to build pressure points. Floating batteries creep forward on barges, small guns and wicker screens. They start chewing at towers that oversee the chain. Sappers get cover for crossing shallow water to set fires at the base of key structures. Meanwhile, signals, flag, drum, horn, tighten the army's choreography. The city feels surrounded because it is. Stone loses allies. The harbor that once fed defenders now feeds the siege. For the men on the St. Romanus line, the soundscape changes. Alongside the rhythm of the great guns is a new, closer noise. Oars creak, the crack of lighter pieces from the inner water. When they look back, they see friendly ships hemmed by enemy flags. The stomach read signals the mind doesn't have time to parse. Help isn't coming that way. This was the moment the wall's job doubled. Hold the breach and hold the harbor. Men are finite. Faith is elastic until it snaps. The chain had done what it always did, stop a fleet. Mehmet just moved the fleet around the rule. And when rules bend, defenses that look eternal start to shake. The Theodosian walls. Stone, time, and cracks. The wall is skin. Cut it, and the city bleeds. For 1,000 years, these stones had been a promise. Moat, outer curtain, inner rampart, stitched with towers like ribs. You approach, and the ground rises against you. First the ditch, deep and wide, then the low wall that spits arrows in your teeth, then the high wall where men look small and spears look long. 3 layers trained empires to give up. Now the layers breathe hard. The moat isn't just a ditch, it's a work site. When the guns go quiet, men drop ladders into mud, shovel silt, and pile fill where the cannonballs have gnawed the scarp to crumbs. The outer wall carries wounds like a veteran. Missing crenels become black mouths. New parapets sprout from rubble and timber frames hammered together by lantern light. The inner wall holds its breath for the next hit. Listen to the cadence. By day, bombardment. By night, repair. Boom, dust, cough. Then scrape, haul, lift. Lime powder floats in the lungs, eyes water. Fingers split under soaked linen gloves. The stones are old, their mortar is older. Where Roman concrete once fused like bone, later patches crumble like scab. The shock finds seams laid by ancestors who never met gunpowder. Anatomy matters. The Theodosian system isn't a shell, it's a body with organs. Between walls runs a peribolos, an inner terrace where defenders move like blood through a vein. From tower to tower, signals flash. Cloth by day, fire by night, voices always. Staircases coil inside towers so men can pour upward with buckets of stones, bundles of darts, and barrels of water. In the killing zones, murder holes wait. They were built for boiling oil and heavy stones, not for answering a stone ball the weight of 12 men. Fatigue is the real enemy. Not just in arms and backs, but in stone. Repeated shock widens microscopic cracks. Plaster plugs pop like knuckles. The wall begins to slough, not fail. It settles, leans into its own weight. You can see it in a tower's stance, slight tilt, hairline smile opening along a joint. A mason lays his ear to it and hears sand shifting. He knows what that means. By the next day, a fresh parapet stands on jumbled core fill that was never meant to see the sun. Meanwhile, the attackers adjust. Guns walk their fire. Not random, methodical. One battery hammers a seam, another worries a tower's base. Sappers creep under the cover of dust to pick at foundations where the moat is choked with debris. They set props in tunnels like ribs, then fire charges to snap them. The ground jumps. A section sags sighs, then coughs out stones like teeth. Defenders rush, throw fascines, jam timbers, and turn the fall into a rampart. It works until the cadence resumes. Inside the wall, the city consumes itself to keep the skin intact. Timber from porches, beams from warehouses, doors from courtyards, stripped and fed to braces. Nails beat flat and reborn as spikes. Every barrel is requisitioned. Rope goes tight across wounds to hold new skins of wattle and earth. Women bring baskets of broken tile to pour into gabions. Boys run water skins until their shoulders bruise purple. One section draws more eyes than most. The Blachernay angle, where the old Theodosian line hooks into later additions near the palace quarter. The joinery is complicated. Different eras meet, different architects, different mortar, different philosophy. That's where small gates hide. The Kirkoporta is one of them, a maintenance door under a stretch of wall that never expected to be famous. Under pressure, overlooked, becomes fragile. It's where routines slip and keys forget their owners. Watch the repairs there. Crews stack rubble 12 feet deep, then face it with planks and baskets. They pour earth, then stamp it with boot heels, then pour again. On top, they lay a new parapet of doors turned sideways, studded with nails, slathered in clay to catch sparks. It looks crude. It functions like a scab. A scab can hold until it can't. The defenders split roles. Some are fighters, halberd, sword, crossbow. Some are tenders, mortar, pick, rope. They rotate, but the rotation phrase. Sleep comes in scraps. Food comes as a heel of bread and a handful of olives. The smell on the wall is a blend of sweat, lime, powder, and the iron tang of blood shed by both sides in dribbles that add up to a river not yet seen. Janissary probes test the rhythm. They don't commit, they measure. A ladder goes up to a fresh-built parapet. A shield edge peers over. A dart takes an eye. The ladder goes down. They count how fast stones arrive, how many arrows answer, where the voices command in Greek or Italian. Each small test writes notes in Mehmet's head. He wants the place where stress has turned discipline into habit, and habit into a blind spot. Meanwhile, the wall sings back with what it has left. Ballistae crack, sending thick darts arcing into gabardined ranks. Handguns pop from slits, little thunderclaps that shock more than they kill. Cauldrons tilt, boiling resin spills in ropes that smoke and snarl. It buys minutes. Minutes buy repairs. Repairs by another dawn. Then the misstep. A hot week, a run of night shifts, a crew change at the Blackernay join. A keyring passes hands with a curse and a yawn. A door is used for hauling rubble out to a work slope. Someone assumes the next man will bar it. The next man assumes the last did. The wall doesn't shout. It just waits, breathing with the men who trust it. Everything is about to hinge on that breath. Constantine XI, the last emperor at the wall. A leader's body binds a fracturing city. Constantine knows it. He rides without ceremony, the purple hidden under iron, scuffed by brick dust. On the wall, he's not a throne. He's a limb. Men straighten when they hear his voice. Not because he's immortal, but because he's here to die where they stand. He moves like a captain on inspection, but he stops like a priest. A wounded archer clutches his side. Constantine kneels, presses a scrap of linen, and promises nothing except that the next ration will find him. He orders the boy's place filled before he stands. The rhythm matters. Keep the line whole. Patch the gaps. Speak the names. He chases unity like a man chasing sleep. In Hagia Sophia, Greeks and Latins kneel shoulder to shoulder while incense fights the smell of sweat and lime. He doesn't linger long. Words waste daylight. But he gives one sentence that lands like a stake. We face one enemy. Old quarrels go in the ground for now. Some flinch at the memory of unions forced by Rome. Others nod because they've seen the chain tricked and the harbor turned. He's not a theologian here. He's a contractor, building a bridge with phrases short enough to carry. He refuses evacuation. Venetian captains murmur offers. Quiet, conditional, practical. A fast galley could take him across the water before the ring tightens. He says no. That decision binds men to a myth they can feel under their palms when they touch the wall. You don't leave a city that's given you your name. He knows what it costs. It sharpens his choices everywhere else. His counsel isn't grand. It's held in rooms stinking of oiled leather and extinguished torches. With him are Giustiniani with his Genoese veterans, Greek commanders who know every tooth in the wall, and clerics who count morale like coin. They argue about powder, how much to keep for the last night, how much to spend to break a sapper rush. He listens, then chooses the option that keeps men believing they can answer the next hour. That's the job. Make tomorrow look reachable. He delivers hard refusals with a steady mouth. Surrender terms come from Mehmet. Promises of life, of status, of churches spared if the gates open. Constantine sends back the line he has to live with. We don't hand over what God gave our fathers. He isn't gambling on rescue anymore. He's gambling on meaning. Die fighting, and the city dies as a story people want to keep. Open the gates, and it dies as a cautionary footnote. He knows this calculus because he only has this leverage left, narrative. We get micro-stories that stick. In a barracks by the Lycus Valley, he shares bread from his own bag. It's coarse, stretched with barley, exactly what the men are eating. He complains about the same grit between his molars and laughs once, a short exhale that isn't performance. Later, he orders armor patches riveted with nails, pried from his own stables. A blacksmith holds up the breastplate, holes jagged, and calls it good work. Constantine nods and straps it on. At night, he writes to his sisters. Wax seals cool while reports arrive warm from men who can't stop wiping dust from their beards. He tells his family what he tells the city. Pray hard, forgive enemies, and if you don't hear from me, tell them I did not run. The letters aren't grand speeches. They're handholds. He walks with Giustiniani along the St. Romanus sector and asks not for bravery, but for time. He needs that line to trade minutes for daylight. Giustiniani answers in terms of carts of stones, coils of rope, and the health of his men. Their bargain is simple. Constantine owns the oath, Giustiniani owns the breach. You can feel the friction. A Greek emperor and a Ligurian war captain tied to one parapet by necessity and pride. He orders the distribution of relics for courage, like a quartermaster orders bolts. Small icons to the companies that face the heaviest drums. Relics of saints, splinters and cloths, touched to brows before dawn watches. Cynics smirk and pocket them anyway. He knows faith is a ration. He spends it where fear eats fastest. Meanwhile, he does the arithmetic no one wants to speak aloud. Powder is finite. Food is finite. Men are too. He reviews the routes for withdrawal within the walls, not for flight, but for quick reinforcement when a gap opens. He has runners memorize turns, courtyards, ladders. He drills the language of emergency. When bells double, when flags cross, when a trumpet holds a single note, you move. This isn't ceremony. It's the last attempt to make accident obey rules. He treats the Latins as partners in sight, not just in words. He stands a moment too long at Giustiniani's post, exposed to the same arching shot that aim for captains. An arrow skips on stone and scratches his gauntlet. He doesn't look down. Men see that. They file it under proof. He denies the one thing many whisper at him, the right to save himself for a future war. There isn't one. This is it. He prepares a velvet robe and tucks it aside with a small sword, too fine for a field. Then, he orders his squires to ready the plainest mail that still holds a shape. He wants to be mistaken for any man until the moment he needs to be seen. You can feel it when he passes. Shoulders lift, curses quiet, hands find work. A leader's body can do that. And because bodies fail, everyone understands the cost. He binds a fracturing city the only way left, with proximity, with refusal, and with the promise to spend himself at the wall he's asking them to hold. Mehmet II, a young sultan's calculus. Stakes define the boy who would be Caesar. Mehmet sits 19, but he wears failure like a noose he's already cut once. He lost a throne as a child to court politics, then took it back with steel and patience. Now he stands before the last Roman wall and measures his own legitimacy against it. If the city falls, he's Kaiser Rum. If it holds, he's a pretender with big guns and small results. His promise to the army is simple and sharp. Take the city, and for 3 days, you own what you can carry, lead, or claim. It's a morale engine with a cost measured in blood and books. He knows exactly what he's buying. Momentum. He also knows exactly what he's risking. His name tied forever to what happens after the gates break. He accepts the trade. He needs hunger turned into obedience. Siege diplomacy comes first. Before he spends powder, he spends words. Envoys cross the lines with terms: surrender, keep your lives, keep your churches, live under my law. He sends gifts to Galata's Genoese, reminders that neutrality pays better than heroics. He threatens and he cajoles. When letters come back wrapped in piety and refusal, he files them in a ledger marked finality. He prefers conquest by contract. He plans for conquest by ruin. Meanwhile, he feeds the machine. He walks the batteries with a craftsman's eye. Angles are wrong. He adjusts them. rates a fire leg. He orders new teams rotated in. He drags small guns closer to spit at parapets while the big ones chew seams. He studies sappers' maps like battle poetry. Tunnels, props, chambers, fuses. He times blasts to gun cycles, so dust cloaks advancing crews. Noise becomes a weapon. Silence becomes a signal. Spies by him minutes the guns can't. Coin finds mouths that tell of thin garrisons, collapsed stairs, a gate used for hauling rubble. Sketches of the Blachernay join arrive on oiled paper. He doesn't gush over intelligence. He checks it against the cadence of probes. A ladder that lingers tells him where defenders are slow. A shout in Italian marks a sector run by Ligurians. He turns gossip into geometry. He preaches in steel and scripture. In the Friday prayers, the city is framed as destiny, a seal on a prophecy that casts him as the hand of God. He lets the imams carry the weight of heaven while he carries the weight of logistics. Both matter. Fear of failing God stiffens spines as much as fear of the lash. He uses each with precision. The harbor trick cements his style, audacity inside planning. He doesn't think in straight lines, he thinks in routes. If the water's blocked, he turns the hill into water. Greased logs and night labor. It's not just spectacle. It's a message to his own officers that limits are to be moved, not obeyed. When ships slide into the Horn, he doesn't celebrate. He redirects crews, positions floating batteries, links signals with drums and flags. Showmanship yields to method. Inside his command tent, the air is thick with wax, sweat, and parchment. Secretaries draft orders that sound like verdicts. Punishments are swift. A captain whose galley failed to press an attack is stripped and paraded, then returned to his oar bench to set pace for the fleet. Mehmet watches, not to savor humiliation, but to plant a rule. Failure costs flesh. The reverse is true too. A gun crew that maintains cadence under counterfire gets silver coin counted into calloused hands. Carrots and sticks aren't metaphors here. They're metal and scar. He reorganizes the line in waves because he's learned from sieges that bled armies dry. First the Ezaps, irregulars, sent to spend themselves on ladders and in ditches. Then the provincial troops, better armed, to widen cracks. Hold the Janissaries back until the wall is thin and the defenders are air in their lungs. He times the drums to control breath. He times the silence to mean now. There's a colder layer under the tactics, a young ruler's fear of being ruled by elders. He sidelines cautious viziers and elevates doers, engineers, sappers, captains who solve problems rather than explain them. He keeps counsel short. He ends debates with assignments. He walks away before anyone has room to build a faction around doubt. He calibrates mercy. When a Christian envoy asks for time, he grants a day and spends it moving batteries closer. When a neighborhood surrenders outside the walls, he forbids pillage there and spreads the rumor inward. He wants defenders to imagine unequal fates, to fracture resolve sector by sector. He isn't just breaking stone, he's breaking consensus. He studies the emperor's movements through lenses of scouts and guesswork. He hears Constantine rides the St. Romanus line and anchors morale there. So he decides to make that ground a drumbeat the emperor can't escape. Hammer the same place until pride makes it personal. Make the breach a duel he can win with numbers. At night, he reads histories of Alexander, tales of Caesar. Not for romance, for patterns. He underlines one lesson with a knife point. Decisive moments look like chaos until a single act pins them into shape. His job is to create the storm, then choose the pin. The calculus is simple on paper, murderous in practice. Promise plunder to turn fear into speed. Use faith to turn speed into endurance. Move guns like surgeons, not butchers. Make the harbor a mouth that bites from inside. Hunt the weak joint. Punish hesitation. Reward cadence. Hold the Janissaries for the hour when the wall is a habit about to fail. Everything he does leans toward that hour. And when it comes, he intends to be the one who names it victory. The fleets collide, hope, fire, and a narrow victory. Stakes tighten to a rope across the throat. If a convoy breaks through, the city buys weeks. If it fails, famine finishes what gunpowder began. On the horizon, 4 hulls lean under canvas, 3 Genoese transports and a Byzantine warship riding high, sides tall like fortresses on water. They carry wheat, powder, and a rumor that help still knows the way to Constantinople. Ottoman galleys swarm to meet them, low, fast, heavy with oars and intent. Grapnels are coiled. Archers squat on the bow benches. Drums set a brutal cadence that oars answer with hard, wet exhalations. The chain at the horn can't help here. The battle will be decided in the throat of the Bosporus, between current and cannon, wind and muscle. The wind favors the tall ships. Their captains read it like scripture. Gust, lull, shift, and ride it closer, sails bellied and creaking. High-sided hulls are ugly in a storm, and glorious when small enemies need to climb. The first galley closes, hooks flashing, arrows tapping like hail against planking. A Genoese crossbowman lifts, looses, and sees a bowman fold over his own deck beam. Bodies slap water. Oars rake and bite again. Then the angle changes. The convoy's lead ship bears down, not past, but over. Its prow shears an oar bank and the galley staggers, portside crippled, a crab in a race. Marines in kettle helms fling javelins point down to stick-in decks. The galley captain orders boarders up ladders, beards flecked, blades out. A barrel rolls from the transport's rail, tar-smeared and smoking. It bursts on the galley's foredeck in fire ropes. Men drop, slap, scream. The sea hisses where pitch meets it. Mehmet watches from shore batteries and rages at physics. He orders more galleys to flank, to take the wind shadow of the big hulls, and strike where sails are weakest. They try. But the convoy keeps a tight triangle, windward ship easing to cover leeward, stern guns barking little iron that spatters against low prows. A grapnel finds purchase, a rope sings tight, a boarding plank crashes down. For a breath, the ships become one fight. On the plank, it's wrists and teeth. A Genoese captain with a split lip plants his feet and takes a janissary in the chest with a short spear, then loses the shaft and draws a knife. A Byzantine sailor swings a belaying pin and breaks a jaw with a sound like green wood cracking. Blood spatters and runs in lines that find scuppers. The plank shifts. A man falls and vanishes between hulls. The rope creaks, fibers popping, then parts. The galley slews away, dragging 2 boarders who kick and claw at the sea until an oar takes one clean across the temple. Wind shifts. The sails snap and refill. The convoy uses the breath to drive forward. Another galley rushes the stern, taken in the teeth by a swivel gun that flings a storm of iron scraps into faces and throat. The galley's bowman drops his bow and staggers back, both hands at his neck. A janissary captain screams the order to close again. He obeys his own command and catches a thrown axe that lodges in his shoulder. He laughs once and keeps moving. From the walls, Constantinople watches and forgets to breathe. When a white cross shows at the mouth of the horn, a sound rolls along the parapets. Not cheer yet. Hope has been expensive. But the shape of it. The chain lowers just enough to admit friends. On the towers, men wave caps and hands and anything that can move. Bells ring in stuttering patterns. Relief is a physical thing. Shoulders drop, knees sag. Mehmet punishes failure. Captains whose galleys pulled wide are hauled to shore, stripped, and set back at their oars to pull shame into muscle. He pays the crews who pressed hardest. Resolve hardens. If walls won't yield to hunger, they'll yield to thunder. He orders batteries to answer the humiliation with cadence. Powder crews sprint. Gunners swab and load until their wrists ache. Inside the city, the victory is narrow and absolute. Grain hits keys. Barrels roll. Powder is lifted by hand chain into towers where men whisper thanks to saints they'd sworn at last night. The convoy bought more than food. It bought a rumor that the sea still remembers the city. Constantine uses it like coin. Rations slightly thicker, words clipped and steady. You did this. Hold. But there's a bill. The wind that saved them won't blow every day. Powder stocks rise and fall with every roar. Mehmet's guns answer with fury that shakes lint from rafters. The convoy's triumph becomes a dare. The siege accepts. The drums grow louder. The ladders get longer. Relief doesn't end a siege. It just resets the clock, with less mercy left in the hands, winding it. Night raids and daylight terror. The middle weeks. Attrition eats in small bites. You don't feel the first one. By the second week, you feel nothing else. Men count sleep in minutes, food in mouthfuls, courage in glances. The city tries to make every night a repair and every day a stand. The siege answers by flipping the script whenever it hurts most. Underground, the war turns blind and close. Ottoman miners nose toward the foundations, tasting damp clay, setting props in tight tunnels. Their lamps throw shaky halos on faces gray with dust. Picks strike like metronomes. Above, a sentry hears a thrum that isn't the guns. He presses his ear to stone. There, vibration like a distant drum underfoot. Counterminers are called. Greeks and Latins dig toward the sound, following breath and guesswork. When the two tunnels meet wrong, men stab at empty air and curse their own echoes. When they meet right, darkness becomes a room full of knives. In those cramped vaults, fights are short and personal. A miner swings a mattock in a space too small and finds a skull. A torch guttered by a sleeve plunges both sides into black, where breath whistles and steel scrapes brick. A barrel of water sloshes, a fuse hisses. An Ottoman charges with a firepot. A Genoese tackles him and wraps both in wet canvas, while the pot spits sparks that eat holes in his shirt and skin. Then a prop is yanked. The roof coughs. Both sides scramble. One man doesn't make it. He's a muffled syllable in the earth. The tunnel collapses with a soft, final sigh. On the surface, night raids try to turn that suffocation outward. Janissary detachments slip up to fresh repairs, knives wrapped to the hilt, shields hooded. They cut stakes, drag away fascines, and roll burning faggots into scabs of wicker and clay. Defenders answer with bells and barefoot sprints. A sergeant cuffs a boy awake and shoves a bucket into his hands. Water hisses against resin. A ladder tips backward and snaps a wrist when a man refuses to let go. The raiders melt when the first light shows, leaving char and footprints and a lesson. Nothing built at night is safe by morning unless you watch it like a fever. Daylight punishes that watching. Probes come in pulses. Azaps run ladders to keep bows busy. Arrows whir, rapping on shields, finding cheeks where helmets ride loose. Then provincial troops press, heavier, with mantlets rolled ahead on wheels, little roofs that drink stones and spit men into the ditch. Crossbow strings fray under grit and sweat. A gunner wipes his serpentine and loses a fingertip when the match jumps. He swears, wraps it, and reprimes. This is the grind, skin traded for seconds. Christian sorties hit back in stabs that cost dear. A gate opens, just enough, and a knot of pike and halberd pushes into the rubble field where yesterday's fall made today's cover. They move like a fist, tight, purposeful. A banner catches on a broken coin vault and tears. They reach a sap trench, dump baskets of lime, and turn to go. The return is the tax. Arrows take the last men in the spine. A captain drags one by the collar with his teeth clenched and his eyes wide, then leaves his glove with the dying man when the retreat wave pulls him. He doesn't look back. He can't afford the memory. The middle weeks teach rotations the way a fever teaches thirst. Armenians, Serbs, and Anatolian auxiliaries cycle on the Ottoman side, while the Janissaries stay rested, a threat in reserve that weighs on the mind more than the body. Inside the city, there's no reserve. Greeks hold, then Italians, then Greeks again with fewer names in the roll. A tower commander counts his company and finds he's short by 7. He doesn't ask where they went. He sends boys to the kitchens for more water and to the chapels for more relics. Rumor becomes a weapon none can dodge. A ring wraps the moon. Ice crystals and coincidence to some, a sign to others that a cycle is closing. On a night when the wind drags smoke low, men swear the great church's dome glows, a smear of light that rises and dies like breath. Priests preach endurance. Skeptics spit and stand their watch. Both carry the same stones to the same parapet at dawn. Belief turns into muscle memory or breaks into silence. Mehmet's imams answer from their own lines, calling conquest a promise they can touch with their hands on the ladders. Drums beat faster the morning after the omen. Gunners swear the powder burns hotter. Fatigue breeds mistakes, and mistakes breed funerals without graves. A water cart flips on a broken stair and spills a night's labor into the dirt. A runner misreads a flag and sends a dozen men to the wrong breach for an hour they can't replace. A mason drops a basket and watches it explode into shards, then keeps working with a shard in his palm because there's no time to dig it out. He'll find the infection later, or it'll find him first. There are bright minutes that feel stolen. A baker slides a loaf into a boy's hands with a wink and a muttered oath about saints and their appetite for flour. A mother cuts her child's hair with a knife held in a fist that won't stop shaking, then tucks the lock into a scrap of cloth. A monk patches a cuirass with waxed thread and says nothing except hold still. Micro-salvations in a city, learning to measure grace in nails and bread heels. And still the cadence rules. Boom, scrape, cough, run. The wall holds as a habit, the habit phrase. Somewhere a key ring changes hands. Somewhere a door waits for a hand that won't arrive. The middle weeks don't look like a turning. They feel like drowning in inches. Then 1 inch turns out to be a step down you didn't see, and the water takes you to the mouth of the river. The moon's omen and the great lantern. Belief under siege. Faith steers courage when rations can't. In late May, the sky tightens like a drum, and a pale ring slides over the moon. It isn't total, but it's enough to turn faces upward. An old prophecy surfaces like something stored in a cistern. When the moon fails, the city fails. It moves through alleys faster than orders. Men who've never read a line can recite it by dawn. On the wall, a sentry points and says nothing. In the church, a priest says everything in one line. Signs test us, not save us. In taverns that serve water with a memory of wine, a mason shrugs and says the moon has tricks. The wall doesn't. But even he glances up between mouthfuls. You can choose what to say. Your eyes will still climb the sky. The siege drinks the omen in 2 gulps. Inside, it settles as dread that wears a cloak of certainty. This is written. Outside, Mehmet's camp turns it into fuel. Imams fold the eclipse into sermons like iron folded into steel. God withdraws light from the stubborn, they say, and that light will return in our standards over their gates. Drums quicken after prayers. Janissaries nod, not superstitious, but trained to carry any edge to the ladder. Then the thing with the dome. A night of low smoke, of wind that can't make up its mind. Over Hagia Sophia, men swear they see a light rise along the curve of the brick, hover, then slip away like a lantern carried off, leaving the crown briefly dark. To some, it's the spirit leaving. To others, it's a trick of fire and mist. A girl on a step in the Augustan claps her hands when she sees it. Her mother pulls her close and begins to cry without sound. Priests answer with doctrine and with sweat. They keep vigil, not for show, but because people need places to put fear. Icons are wiped with cloths that smell of beeswax and smoke. Lamps are trimmed. Words are short and old. Stand, forgive, do not break. A skeptic commander listens at a door, rolls his eyes, and still takes a small scrap of cloth when it's offered. He ties it to his wrist under his bracer. No one sees. He tells himself it's for luck, then mocks the word and calls it habit. Meanwhile, the guns refuse to care. Their cadence ignores prophecy. But belief folds itself into action anyway. A company facing the St. Romanus ditch repeats a line about the Virgin's protection while they haul a cart of stones. They haul faster. A boy on watch near Blacherney mumbles a psalm and misses a flicker at ground level. Movement in a shadow that isn't wind. Omens don't just lift eyes, they tilt them away. In Mehmet's tent, the eclipse is a page in his advantage ledger. He authorizes more public prayers, more preachers in the ranks, and more water for the gunners. He knows morale is a powder of its own. Dry it, tamp it, light it. An officer suggests a dawn assault to match the sign. Mehmet shakes his head. Not yet. He wants fatigue to drink the city for 2 more days. Then, the omen will feel like a schedule, not a story. Inside, Constantine hears reports of the light and orders 2 things: candles in the churches all night, and no change in the watch. He knows fear looks for symmetry. He refuses to give it. He walks the nave of Hagia Sophia at dusk and lays a hand on a column that sweats salt, where mortar meets stone. He says one sentence to the men gathered there: "Our sign is work." Then, he leaves before anyone can build a legend around his presence. By morning, the dome is just a dome, and the moon just a bruise fading. But belief leaves sediment. Some stand straighter, convinced fate walks beside them with a sword. Some feel hollowed out, convinced fate, already past, sentence. Both still climb the stairs when the bells call. Both still bend their backs to the same basket of rubble. And while eyes search the sky, a single ground-level mistake keeps ripening in the dark. A key gone missing, a habit unkept, a door that should have been barred and wasn't. The wall doesn't care about omens. It cares about hinges. The Kirka Porta, the small gate that doomed a civilization. One unlocked door. That's all it takes when a city runs on habits thinner than thread. At the Blacherney join, where old stone meets newer fixes, the Kirka Porta sits low, a maintenance mouth in the wall's ankle. In the last week, crews hauled rubble through it to dump out a work slope. Keys passed from calloused hand to calloused hand. A bar was lifted, set aside, leaned against a crate. Then the shift changed. The bar stayed where it stood. Before dawn, the air holds the cold that knives like. A handful of Ottoman scouts move like a rumor along the ditch edge. They've watched the pattern for nights, lamps here, a cough there, a lull when the watch relief meets a water cart. They reach the door and touch it the way a thief touches luck. The ring gives with a sound too soft for bells. The plank scrapes. The breath on the hinge is a whisper. The gate opens into a throat of shadow. 5 slip in, then 10, then 20. They carry short ladders and a banner wrapped tight around a pole. The first boot lands on the inner terrace. The second steps in the print. A sentry hears a noise that isn't the wall's steady breathing and turns too late. The knife meets him under the jaw. He folds without a shout. His bucket rolls and bumps a stone with a sound that feels like a shout anyway. They climb low stairs inside the wall that were meant for masons and messengers. At the top, a parapet nobody expected to see occupied from that side. A man unrolls the banner. Green silk unfurls with a soft hiss and lifts it into a breeze that barely exists. From below, an Ottoman squad leader glances up and sees a color where none should be. He doesn't wait for orders. He sends a runner with a word: inside. On the city side, eyes catch the wrong flag in the wrong place. A cry runs crookedly along the line. Kirko Porta, Kirko Porta. Half question, half curse. Defenders wheel. The Blacherney sector suddenly matters more than the breach at St. Romanus. Constantine's careful rotations shear under panic's hand. Men peel off from the main line in 2s and 3s, then in knots, then in a stream that looks like relief and is actually loss. The first answer is brave and messy. A Greek captain with 20 men charges the parapet by the maintenance stairs. They're half-armored, half-awake, all committed. They hit the first infiltrator's shoulder first. Blades work short, shields jam. A janissary's teeth click together when a pommel meets his mouth. The banner dips. A hand grabs the pole. Another hand takes that hand at the wrist. The flag doesn't fall. It judders, then rises again, anchored by a second rank that was supposed to be a scouting party and is now a wedge. In the ditch below, the signal spreads like oil on water. Ladders that were meant for the main breach veer. Azaps sprint toward the small door, not because it's the plan, but because it's close to victory you can touch. Mehmet's forward officers don't argue with luck. They echo the push, send companies to widen the puncture. The map tilts. Pressure that was meant to live at St. Romanus leaks into Blackernay, and the defenders pay for both. Inside the city, runners collide in corridors with messages that contradict. Hold St. Romanus. Reinforce Kirkoporta. Seal the door. Relieve the scarp. A boy with a horn blows the wrong call and is slapped, then kissed on the head by the same sergeant who needs him to blow the right one a heartbeat later. Decisions get made at the speed of breath, and breath is short. They try to slam the door. Men drag the bar from where it leaned, but the hinge mouth is choke-pointed with bodies. The bar has to pass hand to hand over shoulders that are fighting. It wobbles, smacks a helmet, drops, is kicked, is found. When they finally set it into the sockets, 3 enemies are already inside the threshold, and now the bar traps them in with friends dying around them. Someone lifts it again in panic. The door remains a wound. On the parapet, a micro-battle becomes a prophecy. The green banner keeps showing. Every time it dips, it rises. Every rise is a message to 1,000 men outside the gate. There's a path. On the main line, a commander looks over his shoulder one time too many. He sees motion where there should be stone and sends 30 men. Those 30 are the 30 the St. Romanus breach needed for the next ladder wave. The economy of force breaks, the deficit compounds. You can trace the therefore in footprints. Because the Kirkoporta pulls men, therefore the largest assault finds softer targets. Because commanders look back, therefore ladders stay on the wall longer. Because the banner flaps where it shouldn't. Therefore drums tell the janissaries it's time to stand up. The defenders at the small gate buy minutes with bone. A Ligurian takes a spear under the ribs and leans on it to pin the thrower in place for his friend's knife. A Greek boy loses his cap and fights bareheaded, hair in his eyes, teeth bared like a dog's. They don't give. They also don't multiply. Numbers do that. The Kirkoporta is not a legend yet. It's a hole. But holes invite flow. Once flow begins, engineering beats heroism. Every man sent here is a man not throwing stones at St. Romanus. Every heartbeat won here is a heartbeat lost there. Small errors under pressure kill cities. This one is beating, louder, and the wall can feel it. The last assault, janissaries and the Emperor's charge. Final hour. No more probes, no more tests. Drums lock the air into a single heartbeat. Mehmet's waves move by the book he's been writing for 53 days. First the Azaps, a human tide carrying ladders and bravado. They run into the St. Romanus scar and spend themselves on the scab of doors and earth the city built last night. Arrows rattle, stones drop. Oil hisses. The first wave breaks and teaches the wall what it already knows. Courage without order is meat for crows. The second wave is heavier, the provincial troops who don't run as easily. Mantlets rumble forward, plank roofs bristling with bolt heads. They bridge the ditch with fascines that smoke under stray sparks. Hooks bite at the parapet. Defenders split spears, stab down, wrench metal free with a grunt and a curse. On ladders, hands trade places. A man takes an arrow and refuses to fall, wedged by bodies that want his rung. The wall feels hands where stone used to feel air. Then the signal the city dreads. The drums flatten to a steady, implacable roll. Janissaries stand. They advance in lines that look like choices already made. No cheers, no chatter, just breath and wood on stone. The guns fall silent, so friendly, shot won't chew friendly backs. Silence is worse than thunder. It lets you hear your own ribs. At St. Romanus, Giustiniani braces his line and spits dust. He shouts for stones to the left, bolts to the right, pikes forward. The men obey because the rhythm is the only thing that can keep lungs from seizing. Ladders slam, hooks set. A janissary helmet crests the parapet, smooth and impersonal, then another, then 6. Crossbows snap and send 2 backward. 4 remain and pull. The parapet becomes a tug of war with lives as the rope. Constantine hears the drums flatten and doesn't wait for confirmation. He throws armor over the purple he never wears in daylight. The plain mail he chose scratches where brick dust already burned his skin raw. He straps the patched breastplate and takes the small banner he had set aside for exactly this hour. The cross, short and white against a field, he doesn't let himself look at for more than a heartbeat. He moves towards St. Romanus with a guard too small to be a myth and exactly big enough to die with him. Meanwhile, Kirkaporta keeps bleeding men from the main line. Runners arrive hoarse. It holds. It falters. It holds again. Constantine orders a handful only. He can't spare more. He needs the breach. He needs the place where the city's fate is already under janissary hands. The first janissary crest hits the parapet like a wedge. They don't climb to fight. They climb to make space for the next rank. A shield pushes, a blade pries, a boot stamps on a knuckle until fingers let go. The parapet sags under weight and blood. A defender slips on resin and finds the sky instead of stone. Giustiniani snaps an order and steps into a gap with his own body. He's a wall as long as his ribs hold. He makes them pay in blood for every inch of wood that stays. Constantine arrives as the line starts to waver in a way that isn't tactical. It's human. He doesn't stand above. He steps onto the parapet with his banner and a sword that's been sharpened too often. Men see him, heads lift. The sound that follows isn't cheer. It's a hiss like a forge when water hits iron, something that turns heat into form. He calls one word, forward, and tips his sword down into the first janissary, who mistook this hour for an equation without variables. 3 waves, like always. Azaps are gone. Provincials cling and die. The janissaries widen their footholds. Hooks bite again. Ladders breed in the ditch. Arrows are running out. Stones are now anything that fits a fist. A broken capital, a jar, a skull. A boy drops a religious icon in the scramble, hesitates, and then throws it at a helmet and watches wood and paint and faith crack on iron and still buy him a second. Giustiniani takes a bolt deep into his chest or shoulder. Sources argue, but the effect is the same. He folds, breath goes shallow, and his veterans look at their anchor and see him lift a hand that means withdrawal. He wants a dressing and a breath to return. The line reads it as loss. They begin to step back, not run, not yet, but enough to turn defense into a rumor. Constantine sees the slippage and knows there's no time to explain, no time to plead. He grabs the nearest man by the gorget and shoves him forward. Then he fills Giustiniani's place with the only thing he has left, himself. He fights like a captain. Short chops, no flourishes. He loses his cap. Hair goes dark with sweat. He leans his shield into a ladder until the wood groans and then gives, and the men on it fall in a bundle that splinters legs. He takes a cut along the cheekbone that threads blood into his beard. He doesn't wipe it. He doesn't look at the wound. Men watching him take that cut decide to give another minute to the wall. But numbers don't negotiate. The janissary line thickens. A wedge finds the parapet near a tower base, where repairs were more hope than masonry. They push. Constantine pivots with his guard to meet them. A spear kisses his thigh above the greave and finds muscle. He grunts and steps through it, blade up, and answers with a strike that leaves the spearman choking on his own breath. Then a stumble, small, deadly. His boot skids on a rib of clay, and his knee hits the plank hard enough to buckle. Hands reach for him. Greek, Italian, friends who plan to die later than he does. He swats them away and rises into the next press. He shouts for the gate team to hold, for the flag to stay where it can be seen. He's not speaking to the line anymore. He's speaking to the story that has to outlive him for the city to mean what he wants it to mean. The breach opens with a sound like timber tearing. The inner scarp gives a foot. That foot is death's width. Janissaries pour through the angle and spread not wildly, but like water takes the slope. Constantine charges into them with the handful that stayed glued to his shadow. A halberd bites his side. A mace glances his helm and turns the world white for a blink. He answers with a last, clean cut that lays a man open from collar to hope. Then the crush. Bodies close. The emperor disappears where iron and breath become one mass that can't remember names. There's no grave, just the legend that the last Roman struck until he couldn't lift his arm. And when the arm fell, the city followed. The gate opens. The wall is no longer skin. It's a scar. The city begins to feel every nerve exposed. The sack, 3 days of smoke, iron, and silence after. When the wall breaks, the city doesn't fall. It unzips. Gates that were mouths become throats. The first rush isn't the elite. It's the human tide that was promised a city for 3 days. Azap's flood streets that haven't seen strangers in a generation. They hit doors with axes, pry shutters, and pull lives out into light that smells like dust and iron. Screams braid into chant. The air changes, it tastes of cedar splinters, pitch smoke, and open blood. The promise Mehmet made now pays. Plunder. Unmetered. If you can carry it, lead it. Claim it. It's yours. A woman clutches a child and a brass lamp. She keeps the lamp. The child is taken. Chains appear from nowhere, coiled on backs, snapped onto wrists and ankles. A money changer's table flips. Coins skitter like insects into corners where hands reach and claws scrape. A boy dives, comes up with 2 silver, and a boot breaks his fingers until both coins drop from a hand that can't open. Churches are magnets. Hagia Sophia becomes a bowl that fills with the city's last prayer. Thousands crush inside under the great dome, a sea of breath and relics held high. Doors slam, bolts slide. Outside, iron kisses iron. Then the wood surrenders, not with one crack, but with a series of small moans that become a roar. The nave becomes a market of bodies. Some are cut down where they kneel. Many are roped. The iconostasis shivers, then goes, gilded wood collapsing into splinters that glitter with leaf. A child reaches for gold and gets a cuff that leaves blood like a red thumbprint on his brow. Bells drop from belfries on cut ropes, bronze mouths that hit cobbles with a thud that shakes shutters open. Men hoist them onto carts, then pry off clappers to stop the ringing that makes horses rear. Libraries, big, small, hidden, become smoke in layers. Scribes hug codices to chests. Leather catches, glue sizzles. Pages lift in heated drafts and float like birds with broken wings, bright with letters that no one will read again. Some bundles vanish under robes into alleys where hands know which door won't open to a kick. Others feed solemn fire because someone with a torch didn't know what they were burning and didn't care. In a side street by a cistern, a Genoese merchant takes a halberd across the jaw that removes the beard and the words behind it. A janissary steps past the bleeding body and orders his men to close the well. Discipline tugs at plunder, not everywhere, not enough. A body wedged in a doorway becomes a door. Dogs sniff, then go silent. Even animals know when noise invites more boots. There are moments of mercy that look like accidents. A woman stumbles and her captor yanks her upright, then shoves her behind him because a bolt just hissed from a second-story slit. He screams up the wall, then laughs and kicks the door in, then drags 3 more out into the chain. Mercy isn't a word here. It's an angle. Fires breed in the draft between markets and near the horn's keys. A cart ignites, tar drips in lines that find gutters and sprint. A manuscript chest is pulled apart for tinder by men who can't read and can count to 3 days. Heat licks paint off walls. Heat blisters painted saints until eyes bubble and run in streaks. Someone throws water. It hisses and returns as steam that tastes like ash on the tongue. Mehmet rides in with the third wave, the one that follows ruin to count and direct. He posts guards at treasuries to funnel loot. He sends officers to throw wet blankets over fires he once controlled and to let others climb, where he means to clear quarters anyway. He orders the Sultan's banners on the palace walls. He rides past Hagia Sophia, dismounts, walks through the wreckage of liturgy and screams, and orders the white cloth of conquest unfurled where the cross had lived. He doesn't pray there, he decides. Street by street, the sack sorts, slaves to corrals by the harbors, weeping in 4 languages, hands bound with rope that leaves burns that will scar into bracelets, goods to wagons with chalk marks, claimed, unclaimed, reserved, gold into purses, purses sewn into belts, belts cut with knives by the next hand. A Greek scholar weeps over a box he can't lift that holds a life of marginalia. A boy with a knife takes the box. He keeps the box. He throws the papers. The wind carries thought into fire that finds the edges first, curls them black, then eats the center. Words lift as smoke that smells like sap and time. The sound changes by nightfall. Less screaming, more low command, more chain clink, more crackle. A silence spreads that isn't peace. It's shock. Survivors sit on thresholds that no longer have doors, hands open and empty, faces the color of plaster dust. A monk kneels in a doorway and gathers 3 scraps of parchment from a pile of wet ash and turns them over like bones. Letters remain, but not enough to make a name. On the second day, plunder loses its first shine and becomes a process. Men tally, men mark, men argue, knives decide. A soldier stares at a bronze basin and pretends to see his face in it until he remembers his mother and sells it for bread. He eats in mouthfuls that cut his gums. On the third day, crows arrive in lines along roof edges, quiet, observant. They hop down into alleys that stick with fluids drying to tack. They test, then feed. Smoke hangs. It coats tongues. It makes speech taste like the inside of an oven. Iron is everywhere, on backs, in doors, in wrists, and smells that never leave clothes. The city goes quiet because there's nothing left to say. Then orders come. The 3 days end because a clock outside suffering said so. Guards form ranks. Blades go back into sheaths with the casual scrape that means this isn't over, just paused. Chains rattle toward ships. Fires die in squares where they started as accidents and ended as strategy. A new rhythm waits behind the soot. Flight of the scholars, what escaped the fire? Amid chains and ash, a few hands still carried light. They didn't run toward ships with gold. They ran with pages pressed under tunics, boxes lashed with cord, names memorized like passwords, memory on the run, ideas as refugees. Some leave through back gates with bribes measured in silver and silence. A scribe slips into a skiff at night, hugging a wrapped codex that smells of damp calfskin and smoke. He rows with arms that never did this work, each pull a prayer that the current favors thought. At the horn's mouth, a Genoese captain takes him aboard because books weigh less than people and sell better in Florence. Practical mercy saves a library 1 spine at a time. We can track the people because their footprints cross chancery records in Italy. Bessarion, once a monk from Trebizond, now a cardinal in Rome, opens his house like a vault in a school. He buys what he can. He invites what he can't buy to stay and teach. His rooms fill with Greek voices turning Latin ears toward words that hadn't echoed in the West in their own tongue in 1,000 years. He isn't alone. Humanists in Venice, Florence, and Ferrara hire teachers whose hands still shake from pulling books out of smoke. Chrysoloras' legacy, the earlier wave, suddenly has company. Pupils who learned the alphabet of Plato now get the corpus. A battered manuscript of the Republic arrives with margins thick with Byzantine notes. Commentary as conversation with the dead. A copyist in Florence squints at abbreviations, learns their rhythm and restores lines that would have stayed broken if not for a man who walked out of a burning city with a bundle under his cloak. Some names of the books survive as stubs in letters that read like smugglers' manifests. Plato, yes. Entire dialogues now circulating where they'd been rumor. Ptolemy's geography, maps stitched to math, a grid the West can feel under its feet for the first time in centuries. Greek commentaries on Aristotle that sharpen scholastic blades, dulled by translation of a translation. Not magic, precision. A lens cleaned and handed to eyes that had been straining. Patrons smell power in ink. Cosimo de' Medici pays a Greek to translate a library into Latin, then funds a school for the tongue itself. Venice, merchant and pirate both, turns its comfort with risk into a hunger for manuscripts that travel like contraband. In Rome, Bessariion's collection becomes a promise. These books won't burn again. Later, that promise hardens into shelves that will be called a library with a name. But right now, it's trunks and tables and men arguing about diacritics until candles gutter. Students learn Greek the way soldiers learn cadence, daily, drilled with stakes. A Florentine boy stumbles through a line of Thucydides and feels history switch from hearsay to voice. An artist in a workshop hears a visiting scholar explain proportion from a text older than his grandfather's church and finds numbers and bodies. A mapmaker hears about Ptolemy's grid and starts drawing the world as a net, not a story. The paradox writes itself. The sack starves the East and feeds the West. Meanwhile, some texts never board a ship. They move as copies made on tables dragged into courtyards where the light is good and the air doesn't choke. A monk writes until his fingers cramp, then smears ointment and writes again. He can't save everything. He can save this one. He chooses a medical compilation because a neighbor knows herbs and a surgeon's son asks questions. Elsewhere, a scholar chooses a poet because grief needs meter. Choice becomes canon. There's discipline in the Exodus, not just running, sorting. Who carries Plato? Who takes the Scholia? Who knows where the Ptolemy went? A ledger begins in exile, a list of what exists where. In Venice, a notary jots titles beside names and sums. In Florence, a printer touches Greek type that's been carved at last and sees how the letters sit on the line. Print waits with his jaws open, ready to bite into hand-copied tradition and spread it in sheets thin as breath. We shouldn't pretend the rescue is clean. Some saves are theft with better marketing. A captain buys a chest from a desperate cleric for a tenth its worth. A noble in Italy displays a volume he'll never read because it proves he can buy what empires couldn't protect. Yet, in that ugliness, something unarguable happens. Ideas leap fire lines. By autumn, classrooms in the West hum with Greek declensions and arguments about forms. Scholars who smelled Constantinople's smoke teach students who never will. The Renaissance doesn't begin in a single room. It begins in many, ink-stained, loud, lit late. The route runs through ash. The cargo is fragile. Enough of it arrives. Lost knowledge, what we likely lost forever. Smoke took bodies, fire took names. What it took most quietly was the map of the past, the threads that let us see how knowledge traveled, changed, and survived. We can list what escaped. We should also count the gaps that opened and never closed. Start with the archives no one romanticizes. The Eastern Roman bureaucracy kept records with a stubbornness that outlived emperors. Tax registers, ship manifests, provincial reports, imperial edicts with commentary. Synod minutes annotated across generations. In Constantinople, chanceries filed, refilled, and bound them into series. Many were already thinned by earlier sacks, fires, and reforms. Still, the capital held unique runs, continuous, local, boring on purpose. Those are how historians stitch centuries together. When the files go, continuity becomes guesswork. We still cite fragments and later summaries. The full voices of clerks who watched borders shift and harvests fail likely went up as ash. Then the scaffolding around the classics, the late antique and Byzantine commentaries that turned hard texts into schools. Scholia on Homer, line-by-line marginalia that preserved alternative readings. Alexandrian and Cappadocian notes on tragedy and philosophy. Not the masterpieces themselves, but the keys, the cross-references, the see also, that told students why a passage mattered and how older scholars disagreed. We have some, thanks to copies made earlier or elsewhere. But the density thins after 1453. Disputes we can sense from later quotations lose their bodies. A debate becomes a rumor. Astronomy took a quieter hit. Ptolemaic tables recalculated for centuries sat in monastic libraries and private collections. Ephemerides refined by Byzantine observers who watched Mars rise over the same sea for a lifetime. Star catalogs updated with corrections to obliquity. Eclipse cycles noted in careful columns. Instrument manuals for astrolabes adapted with local tweaks. We have the big names, the famous treatises. We lack the workshop notebooks, the kind that tell you which method people actually used at sea, in courts, in schools. Navigation and calendar making in the Eastern Mediterranean didn't stop, but the paper trail that proves how they blended Greek, Persian, and Arabic practice thins to almost nothing. Medicine bleeds the same way. Compilations built from Hippocratic and Galenic cores with Byzantine case notes layered on top. Fevers described across decades. Surgical cautions refined after too many deaths. Herb substitutions recorded when trade routes failed. A surgeon's manual that says, "Don't try this cut on men over 50. Avoid winter for this cautery. Anise from Trebizond works better than the Cypriot variety." Those are the lines that change outcomes. Later doctors in the Ottoman world kept excellent records, and Western medicine surged with print. Still, the specific Byzantine thread, the lived adjustments, feels cut. There are the single copies, the books that never reappear. Greek tragedians beyond the canon we now call complete. Minor historians whose chronicles bridged the famous ones. Mathematical works that didn't carry famous names. Treatises on conic sections adapted for practical surveying. Abacus manuals that translated theory into merchants' hands. Commentaries on Archimedes that corrected a diagram and transmitted the correction without fanfare. We suspect they existed because later writers cite them, or because a catalog mentioned them once. We read the citations like fingerprints left at a fire. Theological writing is a forest where missing trees change the shape of the canopy. Sermons, letters, polemics, and harmonies produced during councils and after. Documents that reveal how doctrine hardened or bent in practice. Some were saved in monastic centers beyond the capital. Others were unique to the court's orbit, bound with marginal notes in the hand of bishops, who also managed famine relief. When those volumes burn, we lose not just positions, but the texture of argument, the middle ground people actually inhabited. We face a delicate question about what was destroyed versus what was absorbed. After the sack, manuscripts did move into the new order. The Topkapi Palace treasury and libraries in the Ottoman capital received books, Greek, Arabic, Syriac, cataloged, rebound, sometimes translated, often preserved. That's real continuity. But plunder is a machine that sorts by weight, shine, and obvious use. A gilded gospel is saved. A wormed register is fuel. A luminous Aristotle in a fine hand survives. A crumbling codex of shipping dues from the 11th century feeds a cold soldier. Both are priceless to different futures. Only one looks like treasure in the moment. We should also admit our ignorance. Lists of losses can become myths. Scholars warn against inflating numbers or inventing phantom libraries to grieve. The city endured centuries of earlier crises. Many manuscripts had already dispersed to Mount Athos, to provincial seas, to Italy in earlier waves. Some texts we thought lost have surfaced in palimpsests or remote holdings. Still, patterns don't lie. Centers concentrate knowledge, Catastrophe redistributes with violence. The base of the pyramid, admin files, technical notes, local histories, took the worst of it. Here's the impact. Without those layers, we reconstruct with shadows. We argue from later copies and hostile quotes. We map trade from coins and shipwrecks when ledgers would have told us routes and rates. We guess at classroom practice from elite treatises when syllabi sat 3 shelves away, now gone. History becomes louder at the top and thinner at the bottom. That matters. It tilts our understanding toward emperors and away from porters, toward treatises and away from techniques. Fire didn't just erase, it edited. It made us partial to what glittered and what traveled. It left us with a renaissance sharpened by what escaped and a silence where a civilization's day-to-day mind once spoke. A new order, Ottoman Constantinople, and the shift of worlds. Smoke thins. Orders harden. Mehmet claims the city not with a speech, but with appointments and keys. He takes the title Caesari Rum, Caesar of Rome, because he understands symbols control time. Banners change, taxes resume, the sack stops on command. A city doesn't end, it's repurposed. He repopulates by decree. Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Muslims, pulled, invited, compelled, fill quarters that still smell of wet ash. Artisans get plots, merchants get terms, mosques rise in burned districts, and at the center, Hagia Sophia becomes a mosque, by an order that folds the old sanctity into new ritual. Marble is scrubbed, plaster climbs. The call to prayer meets a dome built for echoes, continuity inside conquest. Power rebalances. The straits are now an Ottoman throat. Customs shift to Ottoman coffers. Venice recalculates risk with every convoy. Treaties come with teeth. In Iberia, kings look outward, away from a closed corridor toward oceans mapped on new grids. The fall is a door slamming that forces ships to find windows. Trade routes arc wider. Silver, spice, slaves, flows recharted by a single city's new master. Gunpowder ends arguments stone once won. Every lord with walls feels the lesson in his ribs. Bastions thicken. Angles replace curves. Fortification becomes math. Artillery schools sprout in courts that once hired poets. The medieval habit of defense dies by example. Yet the Ottomans aren't ash. They absorb. Scholars find seats at court. Scribes catalog Greek, Arabic, Persian manuscripts. Topkapa's shelves take in volumes that fled other fires. Translators work. Judges cite Aristotle through a chain of hands that never leaves the city's new limits. Administration deepens, not thins. The empire pushes into the Balkans with a capital that commands seas and caravans at once. A road for armies, a harbor for taxes, a court for scholars. The city returns to form under new names. The medieval world closes like a ledger. A different account opens, ink still wet, numbers written with powder and rule. Echoes and legends, the emperor, the gate, the light. Memory is the last battlefield. After the fires cool, the city keeps speaking through what people choose to repeat. They say the emperor didn't die. They say Constantine XI turned to marble at the moment the gate gave, buried beneath the walls by an angel's hand, sleeping in armor without rust, waiting for the day a cross rises again on the great dome. The marble emperor, an answer to humiliation that refuses to accept finality. Conquerors planted banners, but the story planted a seed that outlives seasons. You can't chain a legend. At the Kirk of Porta, blame becomes liturgy. One small door, one missed bar, one habit broken at dawn, retold in barracks and kitchens as a warning, sharp enough to cut for centuries. The tale shrinks a civilization's end into a hinge and a hand that failed it. Engineers hear tactics, parents hear morality, leaders hear the cost of drift. It's not fair. Sieges end for 1,000 reasons. But unfair stories stick because they're useful. The gate becomes a proverb. Close what you open, or the world opens you. Then there's the light. Men swear they saw it. The great lantern lift from Hagia Sophia's dome and slip away when the city fell. Some call it a miracle, the spirit leaving a house it had sanctified. Others call it smoke and wind and fear drawing lines in the eyes. Either way, the image carries an argument without words. The sacred moved. The building changed masters, and the story explains the change with an exit you can point to. Skeptics shrug. Believers nod. The dome keeps echoing call to prayer, and under it, the legend hums like a remembered chord. Mehmet's court crafts echoes of its own. Poets frame the conquest as destiny sealed, prophecies fulfilled, a young ruler reading history, and then writing in its margins. Titles matter. Kaiser Rum isn't just a boast. It's a claim on Rome's ghost, an argument that the line didn't break, it curved. The conqueror enters Hagia Sophia not to erase, but to repurpose, and that decision becomes a narrative. Continuity inside victory. Libraries reorganized, banners replaced. The old city wearing a new face that insists it always fit. Across the sea, exiles polish different mirrors. In monasteries and palaces, the fall becomes proof that sin collects interest. Union talks with Rome turned to poison. Pride, they say, invited the bill. Others flip the script and condemn the West for watching a wall crack they'd praised for 1,000 years. Betrayal becomes a lens that makes distance feel like guilt. Every scholar who arrives with a trunk of books carries two stories. What burned behind him, and who should have stood beside him? Even the battlefield breeds parables. Justiniani's wound, chest or shoulder, fatal or not, hardens into a lesson about anchors and how quickly lines unravel when their weight shifts. Some call him hero, others whisper desertion. The truth is, a man bleeding in dust. The legend is a lever used to move blame around the board. We keep returning to the same three images because they do the work facts can't finish. An emperor, vanishing into myth to keep pride breathing. A little gate that turned a continent's last rampart into a cautionary tale. A light leaving a dome to explain why chance changed. They're not lies, they're tools. They let the living make sense of loss that numbers can't hold. Listen closely, and you'll hear the quietest echo of all, the sound of books that didn't survive, of voices cut mid-sentence. Those absences push the legends louder. Where records thin, stories thicken. Where ledgers burn, memory turns into song and accusation. Technology, will, and chance converged on a wall that had held for 1,000 years. Stone met powder. Habit met fatigue. One door stayed open. An emperor stepped forward. A light, seen or imagined, lifted. The city's narrative shattered, then recomposed itself from fragments people could carry. We end where we began, at the breach, at the hinge, at the dome, because that's where meaning leaked out and ran into the world, staining maps, syllabuses, and prayers. The medieval world didn't just stop, it turned into story. Conclusion. What ended, what began? The last Roman city fell, and with it 1,000 quiet voices went silent, while a few loud ones escaped and rewired the West. If this rattled what you thought you knew, watch the next chapter. How those rescued pages lit workshops and war rooms. Subscribe for more buried truths, turn on the bell, and tell me what you'd have saved from the flames. We tell the stories history buried for a reason.